The bullet grazed Dr. Eleanor Marsh's window just as she finished stitching up old Charlie Peterson's hand, and she did not even flinch because gunfire had become as common as birdsong in Redemption, Texas, this scorching summer of 1882. Eleanor had arrived in this dusty frontier town 3 years ago with nothing but her medical degree from the Woman's Medical College of Pennsylvania, a leather bag full of instruments, and a heart she had locked away after watching her fiancé die of cholera on the wagon train west. She was 26 now, and the only physician within 50 miles, which meant every broken bone, every fever, every difficult birth landed on her doorstep. The townspeople had been skeptical at first, a woman doctor being an oddity that made the men uncomfortable and the women curious. But after she saved the sheriff's daughter from pneumonia and set the blacksmith's shattered leg so well he could walk without a limp, they stopped questioning her credentials and started depending on her completely. Her clinic occupied the ground floor of a narrow building on Main Street, with her living quarters upstairs consisting of a bedroom barely large enough for a bed and washstand, and a kitchen where she heated water and occasionally remembered to feed herself. The walls were thin, the roof leaked when it actually rained, and the Texas heat made the rooms feel like ovens, but it was hers, and she had built her life here one patient at a time, one life saved at a time until the work consumed everything and left no room for the loneliness that sometimes threatened to swallow her whole. She heard boots on the wooden steps outside, heavy and uncertain, and then a knock that was more of a thud. Eleanor wiped her hands on her apron and opened the door to find a man she had never seen before, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of whiskey in sunlight. He was holding his left arm awkwardly, blood seeping through his fingers where he pressed them against his bicep, and his face was pale beneath several days' worth of stubble. "I need a doctor," he said, and his voice was rough, like he had not used it much lately. "You found one," Eleanor replied, stepping aside to let him in. She guided him to the examination table, noting the way he moved with the careful control of someone in significant pain trying not to show it. "Sit down and let me see it." He eased himself onto the table, and she helped him peel off his vest and then his shirt, which was soaked with blood on the left side. The wound was a clean gash about 4 inches long, deep but not life-threatening if she cleaned and closed it properly. She had seen worse, much worse, but something about this man made her hands want to tremble, which was ridiculous because she had steady hands, the steadiest in 3 counties. "What happened?" she asked, gathering her supplies, carbolic acid for cleaning, her needle and silk thread, clean bandages. "Disagreement with a man who thought I cheated at cards," he said. "I did not, for the record. I am just good at poker, and he had a knife." "He had a knife," the man confirmed. "I had the sense to duck, mostly." Eleanor cleaned the wound, and he barely flinched, just watched her face with an intensity that made her self-conscious. She was used to patients watching her work, but this felt different, like he was studying her rather than what she was doing to his arm. She threaded her needle and began stitching, her movements practiced and efficient. "I am Caleb Stone," he said after a moment. "I bought the old Henderson Ranch about 5 miles north of town, been fixing it up the past month, but this is my first real visit to Redemption." "Eleanor Marsh," she replied, keeping her eyes on her work, "and you picked quite a way to introduce yourself to the local doctor." "I would have preferred different circumstances," he admitted, "but I am glad the doctor turned out to be you." She glanced up at that, surprised by the warmth in his tone. He was smiling slightly, despite the pain he must be feeling, and something in that smile made her heart do an unexpected flip. She looked back down at her stitching, willing her pulse to slow. "You should avoid card games for a while," she said, "at least until your arm heals." "I plan to avoid that particular player permanently," Caleb said, "but I will take your advice, Dr. Marsh." She tied off the last stitch and bandaged his arm carefully, wrapping the clean linen firmly but not too tight. "Change the bandage daily, keep it clean and dry. Come back in a week so I can check for infection. If you develop a fever or the wound shows red streaks, come back immediately." "Yes, ma'am." He slid off the table, moving more easily now that the worst was over, and reached for his ruined shirt. Eleanor turned away to clean her instruments, trying not to notice the way the lamplight played across the muscles of his chest and stomach, the way his skin was tanned from outdoor work. She was a physician, for heaven's sake. She had seen countless male torsos in her medical career, but somehow this one was affecting her in a way that felt deeply unprofessional. "What do I owe you?" Caleb asked once he had managed to get his shirt back on, though he left it unbuttoned. Eleanor quoted her standard fee, and he paid without hesitation, counting out coins from a leather pouch. Their fingers brushed as he handed her the money, and she felt that odd electric sensation again, stronger this time. She stepped back quickly, maintaining the appropriate distance between doctor and patient. "Thank you, Dr. Marsh," he said, and he lingered in the doorway as if reluctant to leave. "I hope I will see you again under better circumstances." "In my line of work, better circumstances usually means not seeing patients at all," Eleanor replied, but she found herself smiling despite her best efforts to remain professional. After he left, she stood in the empty clinic for a long moment, her hand pressed against her chest where her heart was beating too fast. This was foolish, she told herself firmly. She did not have time for attraction or romance or whatever this inconvenient flutter of feeling was. She had patients who needed her, a town that depended on her, and she had learned the hard way that opening her heart only led to loss and pain. But that night, lying in her narrow bed upstairs, she could not stop thinking about whiskey-colored eyes and a smile that made her forget, just for a moment, how tired she was. The next morning brought a steady stream of patients: Mrs. Henderson with her rheumatism, young Tommy Briggs with a sprained ankle from climbing trees he should have known better than to climb, and Sarah Chen, one of the few Chinese families in town, bringing her father who had been coughing for weeks. Eleanor spent 2 hours examining Mr. Chen, listening to his lungs, asking questions through Sarah's translation, before diagnosing pneumonia and prescribing a treatment plan that would require careful nursing and constant vigilance. "Bring him back in 3 days," Eleanor told Sarah. "Sooner if his breathing worsens. Make sure he stays warm and drinks plenty of fluids." Sarah's eyes were worried but grateful. "Thank you, Dr. Marsh. We can pay. We will work something out," Eleanor interrupted gently. She knew the Chen family struggled financially, that most of the town treated them with suspicion or outright hostility. "Your father's health is what matters now." It was mid-afternoon when the door burst open and Caleb Stone stumbled in, but this time he was supporting another man, someone Eleanor recognized as Pete Wilson, one of the ranch hands from the sprawling Morrison spread. Pete's face was gray with pain and shock, and his right leg was bent at an unnatural angle below the knee. "Horse through him," Caleb said, breathing hard from the effort of half-carrying the injured man. "Compound fracture, I think. I was riding past when it happened." Eleanor's training took over instantly. "Get him on the table carefully." She turned to grab supplies, her mind already cataloging what needed to be done. Compound fracture meant the bone had broken through the skin, which meant high risk of infection, which meant she had to work fast and perfectly. Pete was screaming by the time they got him on the table, and Eleanor administered laudanum quickly to dull the pain. She cut away his pants leg and examined the injury, feeling Caleb's presence beside her, steady and calm. "I need you to hold him still," she said without looking up. "This is going to hurt even with the laudanum, and I cannot have him moving while I set the bone." "Tell me what to do," Caleb replied, and there was no hesitation in his voice. For the next hour, Eleanor worked with complete focus, cleaning the wound, realigning the bone fragments, and stitching the torn flesh closed before splinting the leg in a position that would allow it to heal properly. Caleb followed her instructions perfectly, holding Pete steady when needed, handing her instruments before she asked for them, somehow anticipating what she required. It was like having a trained assistant, and she found herself grateful for his presence in a way that went beyond the practical help he provided. When it was finally done, Pete was unconscious from the laudanum and exhaustion, his leg immobilized in a careful splint. Eleanor sagged against the table, suddenly aware of how much the effort had taken out of her. "Will he keep the leg?" Caleb asked quietly. "If infection does not set in, yes," Eleanor replied. "The next few days will be critical. He needs to stay still, needs constant monitoring." She looked up at Caleb, really looked at him for the first time since he had arrived. He was covered in Pete's blood, his own bandaged arm probably aching from the strain, but his face showed only concern for the injured man. "You should have ripped your stitches helping carry him." "I will let you check before I leave," he said with a slight smile, "but I could not exactly leave him lying in the road." "No," Eleanor agreed softly, "you could not." She arranged for Pete to be transported to the boarding house where Mrs. Patterson, a widow with nursing experience, agreed to watch him overnight. After they left, Eleanor turned to examine Caleb's arm and was relieved to find the stitches intact, though the bandage needed changing. "You were lucky," she said as she wrapped fresh linen around his bicep, "or careful." "A bit of both," Caleb admitted. He was watching her again with that intense focus. "You are remarkable, you know, the way you worked, the way you knew exactly what to do. Pete would have lost that leg if anyone else had said it." Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I am just doing my job." "It is more than a job," Caleb said. "The way you talk to your patients, the way you gave that Chinese man hope this morning, even though you must have known some people in town would criticize you for treating his family with kindness. The way you did not ask Pete for payment before you saved his leg. This is not just a job to you." She stepped back, unsettled by how clearly he saw her. "How did you know about Mr. Chen?" "I was coming to check on my arm like you told me to, but you were busy, so I waited outside." He paused. "I also heard the comments from the men who were sitting outside the saloon. They were not kind." Eleanor felt a familiar weariness settle over her. She had heard those comments before, heard worse. A woman doctor who treated everyone regardless of their ability to pay or the color of their skin was too radical for some folks, too threatening to their comfortable prejudices. "People talk," she said flatly. "I stopped caring what they think a long time ago." "You should not have to stop caring," Caleb said with unexpected fierceness. "You should be celebrated, not criticized. This town is lucky to have you, even if half of them are too ignorant to realize it." Something in Eleanor's chest cracked open at those words, at the genuine anger in his voice on her behalf. She had grown so used to fighting her battles alone, to being the strong one, the competent one, the one who never needed help or support. Having someone defend her, even just in words, felt dangerously close to comfort. "Thank you," she managed, and her voice came out rougher than intended. "That means more than you might think." Caleb reached out as if to touch her hand, then seemed to think better of it and let his arm drop. "Have you eaten today, Dr. Marsh?" The question surprised her. "I had coffee this morning." "Coffee is not food," he pointed out. "There is a decent restaurant 2 buildings down. Would you let me buy you dinner?" "As payment for the emergency assistance, not the medical treatment," he added quickly. "I know you already charged me fairly for that." Eleanor knew she should say no. She should maintain professional boundaries, should not encourage whatever this was developing between them. But she was hungry and tired, and the thought of eating alone in her kitchen again felt unbearably lonely. "All right," she heard herself say, "but I need to check on Pete first, and I should change out of these clothes." "I will wait," Caleb said simply. The restaurant was small and plain, run by a Mexican woman named Rosa who served the best enchiladas Eleanor had ever tasted. They sat at a corner table, and Eleanor found herself relaxing in ways she had not relaxed in months, maybe years. Caleb told her about his ranch, how he had worked as a cowboy and ranch hand for years, saving every penny until he could buy his own land. He talked about his plans for breeding cattle, about the house he was rebuilding with his own hands, about wanting to create something lasting and real. "Why redemption?" Eleanor asked. "There are easier places to start a ranch." "I liked the name," Caleb said with a slight smile. "I figured if a town could call itself Redemption, maybe a man could find it there too." "Redemption from what?" His smile faded. "From being angry and lost, mostly. I spent 3 years after the war drifting, drinking too much, fighting too much, not caring about anything. My brother died at Gettysburg and I survived, and I could not make sense of that. Could not figure out why I got to keep breathing when he did not." Eleanor's throat tightened. She understood that guilt, that survivor's confusion. "I am sorry about your brother." "Me too," Caleb said quietly. "But eventually I realized he would not want me wasting the life he died protecting, so I stopped drifting and started working toward something. Bought the ranch 6 months ago, been fixing it up ever since." He paused. "What about you? What brought a trained physician to a nowhere town in West Texas?" Eleanor looked down at her plate, at the food she had barely touched. She did not talk about this, about James or the wagon train or the cholera that had stolen her future. But something about Caleb made her want to share, made her feel like he would understand. "I was engaged," she said finally. "James Thornton. He was a lawyer, good and kind and full of plans for our future. We were coming west together, planning to settle in California, but cholera hit our wagon train in Kansas, and he died in my arms while I tried everything I knew to save him." She swallowed hard. "I could not save him. All my training, all my knowledge, and I could not save the man I loved." Caleb's hand covered hers on the table, warm and solid. "That was not your fault." "I know that here," Eleanor said, tapping her temple, "but knowing and feeling are different things. After he died, I could not face going to California alone, could not imagine building the life we had planned without him. So when the wagon train reached the next town, I left. Started traveling from place to place, offering my services as a doctor, until I found redemption and realized I was too tired to keep running." "And you have been here ever since," Caleb said. "Saving lives, healing people, giving everything to everyone who needs you." "It is easier than dealing with my own life," Eleanor admitted, surprised by her own honesty. Caleb's thumb brushed across her knuckles, a gesture so gentle it made her eyes sting. "Maybe it is time someone took care of you for a change." Eleanor pulled her hand away, suddenly frightened by how much she wanted to leave it there, how much she wanted to lean into his comfort. "I do not need taking care of." "Everyone needs taking care of sometimes," Caleb said. "Even strong, brilliant doctors who heal entire towns single-handedly." She looked at him then, really looked at him, at the sincerity in his eyes and the patient understanding in his expression. He was not pushing, not demanding anything, just offering something she had not had in so long. Someone who saw her not as a physician or a miracle worker or an oddity, but as a woman who was carrying too much alone. "I do not know how to do this anymore," she whispered. "How to let someone in. I buried that part of myself with James." "I am not asking you to dig it up all at once," Caleb said gently. "Just maybe do not barricade the door quite so firmly." They finished dinner in companionable silence, and Caleb walked her back to her clinic as the sun set, painting the dusty street in shades of gold and crimson. At her door, he tipped his hat and smiled. "Thank you for dinner, Dr. Marsh." "Eleanor," she corrected impulsively. "You can call me Eleanor," his smile widened. "Eleanor, and you should call me Caleb." "All right, Caleb," she said, testing his name on her tongue and liking the shape of it. After he left, Eleanor climbed the stairs to her small apartment and lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling. Her hand still tingled where he had touched it, and her heart felt like it was waking up after a long sleep, stretching and stirring in ways that were both wonderful and terrifying. The following weeks fell into a pattern that felt almost like courtship, though Eleanor would not have called it that. Caleb came to town regularly, always with some practical reason. Supplies for the ranch, business at the bank, checking on his healing arm. But he always stopped by the clinic, and more often than not, he brought something for her. Fresh vegetables from the garden he was coaxing to life, wildflowers he had found on his property, once a beautiful piece of turquoise he had unearthed while digging a new well. "For your windowsill," he said, pressing the stone into her palm. "So you have something pretty to look at besides blood and bandages." Eleanor placed it where the light would catch it and found herself glancing at it throughout her busy days, a reminder that beauty existed alongside suffering. She continued her relentless schedule, treating patients from dawn until well past dark most days. There was an outbreak of measles among the children that kept her running between houses for a week straight. And then old Samuel Morrison fell from his horse and needed surgery to repair internal bleeding. Eleanor performed the operation on her kitchen table because the clinic room was too small, working by lamplight while Mrs. Patterson assisted and Samuel's family waited anxiously downstairs. When she finally emerged, exhausted and blood-spattered but triumphant, she found Caleb sitting on her steps. He had been there for 5 hours, he admitted, after hearing about the emergency surgery from someone in town. "I thought you might need a friendly face when you were done," he said simply. Eleanor sat down beside him, too tired to maintain her usual defenses. "He is going to live, I hope." "If you think he will live, then he will," Caleb said with complete confidence. "You do not strike me as the overly optimistic type." Despite her exhaustion, Eleanor laughed. "No, I suppose I am not." She leaned her head on his shoulder before she could stop herself and felt his arm come around her, solid and comforting. They sat like that while the night deepened around them, not talking, just being together. Samuel Morrison did live, and his recovery was the talk of the town for days. Eleanor found her practice growing even busier, people coming from farther away after hearing about the doctor who could perform miracles. She was grateful for their trust, but overwhelmed by the sheer volume of need. It was Caleb who noticed she was burning out, who saw what no one else seemed to see because they were too focused on their own urgent problems. He arrived one morning to find her asleep at her desk, her head pillowed on her arms, having collapsed there after treating a difficult childbirth that had lasted all night. "Eleanor," he said softly, shaking her shoulder. "Come on, you cannot sleep here." She woke disoriented and stiff, blinking up at him. "What time is it?" "Just past 8. You have patients waiting downstairs." Eleanor groaned and tried to stand, but her legs nearly gave out. Caleb caught her, his hands firm on her waist. "When did you last have a full night's sleep?" "I do not remember," she admitted. "When did you last eat a real meal?" Eleanor could not answer that either. Caleb's jaw tightened. "This cannot continue. You are going to kill yourself trying to save everyone else." "I am fine," Eleanor protested weakly. "You are not fine. You are exhausted and probably malnourished and running on sheer stubbornness." His voice was sharp with worry. "What happens to this town when you collapse from exhaustion? Who will heal them then?" The practical argument hit home in a way emotional appeals would not have. Eleanor sagged in his grip, acknowledging the truth of his words. "I do not know how to stop," she whispered. "They need me." "They need you healthy and functional, not worked to death," Caleb said. "Let me help. You are not a doctor." "No, but I can make sure you eat regularly. I can screen patients and send away the ones with minor complaints that do not need immediate attention. I can handle the practical details so you can focus on the actual medicine." He cupped her face in his hands, making her look at him. "Please, Eleanor, let me help you. Let me take care of you the way you take care of everyone else." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. She had been strong for so long, independent for so long, that accepting help felt like admitting defeat. But she was so tired, bone-deep tired, and the offer of support was almost unbearably tempting. "Just for a little while," she said finally, "until I catch up." But it became more than a little while. Caleb started spending his days at the clinic, and his presence transformed Eleanor's practice in ways she had not expected. He built a proper waiting area with benches, organized her supplies and instruments, kept meticulous records of appointments and payments. He was gentle with frightened children and firm with demanding patients who thought their minor complaints should take precedence over genuine emergencies. He made coffee in the mornings and brought lunch from Rosa's restaurant, and insisted Eleanor take breaks to eat. More than that, he provided emotional support that Eleanor had not realized she desperately needed. After she lost a patient, a young mother who died of childbed fever despite everything Eleanor tried, it was Caleb who found her crying in her apartment and held her while she grieved, who reminded her of all the lives she had saved even as she mourned the one she could not. "You cannot save everyone," he said gently, stroking her hair. "No doctor can, but you give every patient everything you have, and that matters more than you know." "It does not feel like enough," Eleanor choked out. "It is enough. You are enough." Caleb tilted her face up, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "You are more than enough, Eleanor Marsh." And then he was kissing her, soft and careful and full of tenderness, and Eleanor was kissing him back, her hands clutching his shirt, her heart breaking open after being closed for so long. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against his. "I am afraid," she whispered. "Of what? Of losing you. Of letting myself love you and then having you taken away like James was." Caleb's arms tightened around her. "I cannot promise that nothing bad will ever happen because life does not work that way. But I can promise that I am not going anywhere by choice. I love you, Eleanor. I have loved you since the first moment I walked into your clinic and you looked at me like I was just another patient who needed healing. I love your strength and your compassion and the way you give everything to your calling. And I want to spend whatever time we have together, whether that is 50 years or 50 days. Eleanor pulled back to look at him, seeing the absolute sincerity in his eyes. She thought about James, about the life they had planned and lost. She thought about the 3 years she had spent locked away from feeling, focused only on work and duty and survival. And she thought about Caleb, about how he had quietly and persistently shown her that her heart was not dead, just dormant, waiting for someone patient enough to coax it back to life. "I love you too," she said, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. "I did not want to, but I do," Caleb laughed, the sound full of joy. "That is the most reluctant declaration of love I have ever heard." "I am not good at this," Eleanor admitted. "You are better than you think." He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Eleanor let herself fall into him, into the terrifying and exhilarating feeling of being loved and loving in return. They married 2 months later, in a simple ceremony in the clinic with just a few close friends present. Rosa cooked an elaborate meal, Mrs. Patterson cried happy tears, and even crusty old Charlie Peterson showed up with a bottle of whiskey to toast their happiness. Eleanor wore a simple blue dress rather than traditional white, and Caleb wore his best shirt and looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. "I promise to love you and support you," Caleb said during their vows. "I promise to make sure you eat and sleep like a normal human being, and I promise to heal your heart the way you heal everyone else, every day for the rest of our lives." Eleanor's voice shook when she replied, "I promise to love you and trust you. I promise to let you help me carry the weight I have been carrying alone. And I promise to build a life with you, not just survive but actually live." After the ceremony, after their friends had left and night had fallen, Caleb carried Eleanor upstairs to the small apartment she had occupied alone for so long. They made love slowly and sweetly, learning each other's bodies with the same careful attention Eleanor brought to medicine and Caleb brought to everything he did. Afterwards, lying in his arms in the narrow bed, Eleanor felt a peace she had not known since before James died. "We need a bigger bed," Caleb murmured against her hair. Eleanor laughed. "We need a lot of things. A bigger apartment, more medical supplies, another examination table since you broke the first one when you decided to reorganize." "I did not break it," Caleb protested. "It was already unstable." "It was fine until you moved it." "Details," Caleb said dismissively, and Eleanor laughed again, marveling at how easy it had become to laugh, to feel light and happy instead of just competent and capable. They spent the next year building a life together. Caleb sold his ranch and used the money to buy the building next to Eleanor's clinic, expanding her practice into a proper medical facility with a real surgery, a recovery room, and living quarters above that actually fit 2 people. He hired a young man named Marcus, fresh from medical school back east and eager to learn from a frontier doctor, to assist Eleanor so she was not carrying the entire medical burden of the region alone. With Marcus handling routine cases and Caleb managing everything else, Eleanor finally had time to breathe, to think, to be more than just a physician. She discovered she enjoyed cooking when she actually had time to do it properly. She learned to play chess and got so good she could beat Caleb 3 games out of 5. She started a small garden behind the clinic and found unexpected pleasure in watching things grow. But medicine remained her calling, and now with help, she could do even more. She traveled to surrounding ranches to provide care for people who could not come to town. She established a small school to train local women in basic nursing and midwifery, passing on her knowledge so the community would be less dependent on a single physician. She wrote articles for medical journals about frontier medicine, sharing her experiences and techniques with doctors across the country. Caleb supported every endeavor, proud of her work even when it meant long days apart. He had started breeding horses, a business that thrived because of his patience and skill with animals. Their lives were full and busy, but they always made time for each other, for quiet evenings reading together. For Sunday rides out to a creek Caleb had discovered where they could swim and picnic away from the demands of the town. It was on one of those Sunday afternoons, about 18 months after their wedding, that Eleanor told him she was pregnant. They were lying on a blanket beside the creek, the Texas sun warm on their faces, and Eleanor had been trying to find the right words for an hour. "I am with child," she finally blurted out, graceless and direct. Caleb sat up so fast he nearly knocked her over. "You are sure?" "I am a doctor, Caleb. Yes, I am sure." His face went through a series of expressions too quick to catalog before settling on pure, undiluted joy. "We are having a baby." "We are having a baby," Eleanor confirmed, and then she was in his arms, both of them laughing and crying at the same time. "Are you happy?" Caleb asked, suddenly serious. "I know you did not plan this with your practice and everything." "I am terrified," Eleanor admitted. "But yes, I am happy. Happier than I knew I could be." The pregnancy was difficult. Eleanor had morning sickness that lasted all day, then swelling in her ankles, then false labor pains that had Caleb panicking and Marcus running for hot water. But through it all, Caleb was there, patient and steady and completely devoted. He took over even more of her workload, insisted she rest, brought her tea and crackers when she was nauseated and rubbed her back when it ached. "I am supposed to be the doctor," Eleanor protested one evening as he massaged her swollen feet. "And I am your husband," Caleb replied, "which means taking care of you is my privilege and joy." Their son was born on a blazing July afternoon in 1884, after 12 hours of labor that Eleanor approached with the clinical detachment of a physician right up until the pain got too intense, and she became just another woman giving birth. Mrs. Patterson attended the delivery with Marcus assisting, while Caleb paced downstairs and wore a path in the floorboards with his anxious walking. When Mrs. Patterson finally called him up and placed the baby in his arms, Caleb wept openly. "He is perfect," he said, voice thick with emotion. "Eleanor, he is absolutely perfect." Eleanor, exhausted but euphoric, looked at her husband holding their newborn son and felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. They named him James Caleb Stone, honoring the past while embracing the future. Motherhood transformed Eleanor in unexpected ways. She had always been competent and capable, but now she discovered reserves of tenderness she had locked away after her first James died. She learned to balance her medical practice with caring for her son, often treating patients with James sleeping in a basket nearby. The town adapted too, growing accustomed to the sight of their doctor nursing her baby between examining patients. He is going to grow up thinking a medical clinic is normal living space, Caleb joked one afternoon, watching Eleanor stitch up a cut on a farmer's hand while simultaneously keeping one eye on their 3-month-old. Is that such a bad thing? Eleanor replied. Maybe he will want to be a doctor too. Or maybe he will run screaming in the opposite direction, Caleb suggested, but he was smiling. The years flowed past, marked by the milestones of James's childhood and the steady rhythm of their work and life together. When James was 2, they had a daughter they named Rose, who had her mother's determination and her father's easy charm. 2 years after Rose came another son, Thomas, who was quieter than his siblings but fiercely loyal. Eleanor continued her medical practice, though she cut back her hours to spend time with her children. Marcus became a full partner in the clinic, and together they built Redemption's medical care into something truly exceptional. They added a small hospital with 6 beds, trained more local women as nurses, and established a program to provide free care to those who could not afford it. Caleb's horse breeding business flourished, and he became known throughout Texas for producing exceptional animals. But his proudest role was as husband and father, and he never missed an opportunity to tell anyone who would listen about his brilliant doctor wife and their remarkable children. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Caleb surprised Eleanor with a trip to San Antonio, just the 2 of them, leaving the children with Mrs. Patterson and Marcus. They stayed in a real hotel with a private bathroom, ate in fancy restaurants, and spent 3 days doing absolutely nothing but enjoying each other's company. Do you remember when you told me you had buried your heart with James? Caleb asked one evening as they walked along the river, his arm around her waist. I remember, Eleanor said. I meant it when I said it. I know you did, but I also knew that hearts do not really die, they just go dormant, waiting for the right conditions to bloom again. He stopped walking and turned to face her, his hands framing her face. Thank you for letting me be those right conditions. Thank you for taking a chance on love even though you were terrified. Eleanor felt tears spill down her cheeks, the good kind that came from overwhelming happiness. Thank you for being patient enough to wait for me to find my way back to living. Thank you for seeing past the doctor to the woman underneath, who was so lonely she had forgotten what it felt like to be whole. They kissed there beside the river, 10 years of love and partnership and shared joy flowing between them. When they finally pulled apart, Eleanor thought about the journey that had brought her here. The wagon train and the cholera and the grief that had nearly broken her, the dusty Texas town where she had rebuilt herself one patient at a time, the cowboy who had walked into her clinic with a knife wound and ended up healing something far deeper than any physical injury. I love you, she said simply, more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. I love you too, Caleb replied, though I am fairly certain I love you more. That is medically impossible, Eleanor said with mock seriousness. I am a doctor, I would know. Are you really going to pull professional credentials in a discussion about love? Absolutely, Eleanor said, and they were both laughing as they continued their walk, hands intertwined, hearts completely healed. The years continued to pass, bringing the usual mixture of joy and sorrow, triumph and loss. Eleanor's children grew into remarkable young adults. James studied medicine back east, determined to follow in his mother's footsteps, but bring new techniques back to Texas. Rose became a teacher, opening a school that welcomed all children regardless of their background. Thomas took over his father's horse breeding operation and expanded it beyond anything Caleb had imagined. Eleanor and Marcus continued their medical partnership until Marcus retired at 65, proud of the legacy they had built. By then, James had returned from medical school and joined his mother's practice, bringing new knowledge while respecting the wisdom she had earned through decades of frontier medicine. Together, mother and son established what would eventually become Redemption's first full-scale hospital. Through everything, Caleb remained Eleanor's anchor and partner. He was there for every triumph and every loss, every exhausting day and every moment of peace. They grew old together gracefully, their love deepening with time rather than fading. On the evening of their 40th wedding anniversary, they sat on the porch of the house they had built together, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. They were both in their 60s now, their hair gray, their bodies bearing the marks of full lives well lived. "Do you ever regret it?" Eleanor asked suddenly. "Giving up your ranch to be with me, spending your life supporting my medical practice instead of focusing entirely on your own dreams?" Caleb looked at her with surprise. "Regret marrying you, regret building a life with you. Eleanor, loving you and supporting your calling has been the greatest privilege of my life. Every single day with you has been a gift, even the hard days," Eleanor pressed. "The times I was too busy, too focused on my patients, too exhausted to be the wife you deserved." "Especially those days," Caleb said firmly. "Because on those days I got to be the person who made sure you ate, who held you when you cried, who reminded you that you were human and allowed to have limits. You gave healing to the whole town, but you let me heal your heart. That trade seems more than fair to me." Eleanor leaned her head on his shoulder, the gesture as natural now as breathing. "You did heal my heart. I did not think it was possible after James died, did not think I could ever feel whole again. But you were so patient, so persistent, so completely devoted that eventually I had no choice but to let you in. And I am so grateful I did." They sat in comfortable silence as the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to emerge. Eleanor thought about the scared, closed-off woman she had been when she first arrived in Redemption, about the long years of pouring everything into her medical practice, because it was easier than dealing with her own loneliness and grief. She thought about the day Caleb had walked into her clinic with a knife wound, and somehow seen past all her defenses to the woman underneath, who was desperate for connection but too afraid to reach for it. "I was so angry when I started to fall in love with you," Eleanor said softly. "I remember thinking that you had ruined everything, that I had my life perfectly controlled and organized, and you were messing it all up just by existing." Caleb chuckled. "I could tell. You were extremely hostile for a woman who was supposedly providing medical care." "I was not hostile, I was professional." "You were hostile," Caleb insisted. "But I did not mind because I could see the fear underneath the anger. I recognized it because I had felt the same way after my brother died, that terror of caring about something and having it taken away." "How did you get past it?" Eleanor asked, even though she knew the answer. "I decided that the risk of loss was worth the chance at happiness," Caleb said simply. "I decided that living a half-life to protect myself from pain was worse than living fully and accepting that pain is part of the package. And then I met you, and you were so brilliant and fierce and determined to heal everyone but yourself, and I thought, there is someone who needs healing more than she needs another patient." "So you decided to heal me," Eleanor said. "I decided to try," Caleb corrected. "Whether you let me or not was always your choice. I am just grateful you eventually chose to let me in." Eleanor lifted her head to kiss him, soft and sweet, 40 years of love and partnership condensed into that simple gesture. "Best choice I ever made," she murmured against his lips. They had 5 more good years together before Caleb's heart started to fail. Eleanor recognized the symptoms long before he admitted to feeling unwell, and as a doctor, she knew exactly what they meant. There was no cure, no treatment that would do more than ease his symptoms and buy a little time. She told him the truth because he deserved it, and because after 45 years together they did not lie to each other about anything. "How long?" he asked calmly, sitting in her clinic, now their son James's clinic really, though Eleanor still consulted regularly. "Months, maybe a year if we are fortunate," Eleanor replied, and her professional composure cracked. "I am sorry. I am so sorry, Caleb. I can heal so many things, but not this. Never the things that matter most." Caleb pulled her into his arms, comforting her even though he was the one dying. "You gave me 45 years I never thought I would have. You gave me love and partnership and a family I am so proud of I could burst. You gave me purpose and joy and the privilege of watching you change the world one patient at a time. If that is all the time we get, then I am grateful for every single second." They spent Caleb's last months surrounded by family and love. Their children came home, bringing grandchildren and great-grandchildren Eleanor had not seen in months. They told stories and laughed and cried together, celebrating Caleb's life rather than just mourning its approaching end. Eleanor cared for him herself, using all her medical knowledge to keep him comfortable and pain-free. In their quiet moments alone, they talked about everything and nothing, reviewing their life together and finding joy in the memories they had created. "Do you think you will marry again after I am gone?" Caleb asked one afternoon, his voice weak but still full of affection. "Absolutely not," Eleanor said firmly. "Once was terrifying enough. Besides, no one could possibly measure up to you. There must be some lonely old doctor out there who needs healing," Caleb teased. "Let him stay lonely," Eleanor replied. "I am a one-husband woman, Caleb Stone. You used up all my capacity for love, and I am not interested in finding more." "You will be lonely," Caleb said seriously. "I hate thinking about you being lonely. I will have our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. I will have my work and my patience and my memories of you. I will not be lonely, my love. I will be grateful for what we had." Caleb died peacefully one October evening with Eleanor holding his hand and their children gathered around his bed. His last words were, "Thank you for letting me heal your heart," and Eleanor's last words to him were, "Thank you for loving me enough to try." The grief was profound, a loss that shook Eleanor to her core despite having known it was coming. But it was different from losing James on the wagon train all those years ago. That loss had been sudden and senseless, leaving her broken and unable to function. Losing Caleb hurt just as much, but it did not destroy her because she knew with absolute certainty that she had been loved completely, that they had built a beautiful life together, that nothing had been left unsaid or undone. She continued working, because healing others had always been how she processed her own pain. At 70 years old, she was still sharp and capable, still respected throughout the region as a physician of exceptional skill. Her son James ran the hospital now, but Eleanor consulted on difficult cases and taught the next generation of doctors the lessons she had learned over decades of practice. She lived another 10 years after Caleb died, 10 years of watching her family flourish and her medical legacy grow. When she finally passed away peacefully in her sleep at 80 years old, the entire town of Redemption shut down for her funeral. Hundreds of people attended, many of them alive only because of her skill and dedication. They told stories of lives saved, children delivered, illnesses cured, all because a brilliant young woman had arrived in their dusty frontier town with a medical degree and a locked heart, and had chosen to stay and heal them all. Her children buried her next to Caleb, under a headstone that read, "Eleanor Marsh Stone, physician and healer. She mended bodies and he mended her heart, and together they built a legacy of love and service." The clinic continued for generations, run by her descendants who inherited her calling and her compassion. The hospital she founded grew into a regional medical center. The nursing school she established trained hundreds of women in the healing arts. But more than any of that, Eleanor left behind the memory of a life fully lived, a heart that had been broken and healed, and a love story that proved that even the most damaged souls could find redemption if they were brave enough to try. And in the end, that was her greatest healing of all, not the countless patients she saved, but the woman she became when she let a persistent cowboy with kind eyes and patient hands convince her that her heart was not dead, just waiting for the right person to bring it back to life.